Hello, everyone, and welcome to reality. I'm Lev, and I'm here with William.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we're talking about voter fraud. Somewhat relevant to the election, but not specifically to the election. We're just discussing voter fraud in general. What are the concerns there might be about voter fraud in general, and just different arguments of why we might be concerned or shouldn't be concerned. I'm thinking that it can be a concern, but we just have checks in place for that. Do you have anything to add, William?
Yeah, just to set some context, we're recording this in November of 2020, and it's a big issue now because of the Trump versus Biden election and all the controversy going on now with the votes and mail ballots. And I am pretty strongly against mail-in ballots versus absentee ballots. I think absentee ballots, where you have to request a ballot because you're not unable to go to a polling station, is generally okay. I think there's no real big concern for fraud in that instance. But when you have something like mass mailing of ballots to entire register rolls, a huge problem there because it opens up and exposes the system to widespread corruption and fraud.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's always that concern that it could leave open room for fraud, but in a way, no matter what, every kind of voting has room for fraud. I recall that I was reading about how elections in like the 1890s, some people would vote once and they'd leave and come back, or they have a beard when they first vote. They leave and then they shave and then they vote again. Voter fraud isn't some new thing, but I do see what you mean by the mail-in ballots being potential for more fraud, only because the availability of the ballots is higher. Is it more than just availability of the ballots that concerns you about the potential for fraud there?
I think it's the ease of it. Like you were discussing the old school fraud where they show up in disguises and sometimes they use names of dead people. In that case, it's harder to do because you got to come up with a disguise. You got to actually be a physical person at the polling station and go through this rigmarole. There's a greater chance of getting caught doing that. The main problem I have with it is that it's easy to do. You don't have to show up at the polling station. You just have to get your hands on all these ballots, which is pretty easy to do apparently, especially if you're a corrupt postal service worker. But even if you're not, you can follow the postal service around and then just grab all the ballots they deliver. And then you can forge signatures and send in the ballots. And who knows what the checking mechanism is to see if it's a valid ballot at the counting centers. So my main concern is that it's much easier. It's allowing the system to be corrupted in a much easier way.
Yeah, I see the ease of corruption. I'm thinking though that it's almost beside the point what the ways you can have fraud, because it's really just up to the ingenuity of the criminal to come up with ways to do fraud. I'm sure there's more ways than we're thinking of and more complex ways that you might not be able to catch. What really counts, I think, is, do you have the verification process in place? Do you have a means in which to make sure that as they come in, they get checked automatically? It should be then it wouldn't matter if there was fraudulent votes. It would be easy to catch it, really, how much fraud there is, only that you stop it all the time. And that's more my interest. I'm not even so worried that there could be fraud out there, even how much. I'm only concerned if we suspect something's going on, or we just need to double check everything. Do we have mechanisms to do that? Which would be like recounting, or just looking at ballots again by hand, or better yet, they would be digital, and you could just calculate in terms of like the way the data or the time, like a timestamp of when it was submitted and things like that.
They have a lot of different verification measures, I believe. They have their date stamps and like when they receive the ballot, and they have signatures that they check against voter rolls or registrations, and that can work to a degree. You can also check to see if someone voted in person. Like when I went to vote in person, they told me that my mail-in ballot had been canceled because I showed up in person. But I never received a mail-in ballot in the mail. So I don't know if it got lost in the mail or if someone stole it. So who knows what happened to my ballot. But imagine people who don't go and show up in person and don't vote. There's millions of people who don't vote. And if someone else gets a hold of those people's mail-in ballots, then they can vote on their behalf. And the person who was supposed to vote never even knew that their ballot was stolen. So that's the potential problem with the mail-in ballots, is that you get all these mail-in ballots flooding in from various people, and only the ones who actually go in person to vote in person will have those ballots canceled. The rest of them will have to be discovered some other way if they're fraudulent.
You are pointing out an issue with it, but does that mean you shouldn't even go for mail-in ballots? And maybe it's easier, but on the other hand, might it be easier to actually check it than otherwise? That if you have, I think all you would need to do is implement some measures that wouldn't be that difficult. And yeah, if you don't have anything against that, I would expect there'd be more fraud, but at the same time, I think you could check it more easily. That maybe in terms of, maybe you just add something like a signature. I'm not sure what else you could add to it, like a barcode of some kind. I'm not sure what sort of implementations would work, but there must be some way to make sure that, like a key in a way, like you as the voter have the key, but it doesn't matter how many things you send out because only you have the key. So only you can verify it. Like there's different procedures like that in like internet protocols and whatnot. With encryption, it would seem that you could use encryption practices to implement with the mail-in, and it would be so easy. Once you implement it, then it doesn't matter how many ill intent there is or how many people intend to do something bad. You could, if you have the key, then as the voter, then nothing could go wrong.
I see potential problems with even that system because not everyone's going to respond to whatever verification measures you put in place. Let's say you have a ballot, you're at the ballot counting center, and you have a mail-in ballot that you don't know is valid. It has a signature on it. It has everything you need on it. But let's say you can't match the signature to the one on the register roll. Maybe it looks kind of okay, but you're not sure. Maybe it's a little different than it used to be. And so you're skeptical and you don't know if that's the signature of that person. How are you going to verify that that person actually signed it or if it was forged? Is there going to be an army of signature specialists to decide, oh yeah, that's a valid signature? Or do you try to call the person? What if they don't answer? Do you have, like, what is this barcode key thing? How does that work? if someone doesn't respond to your attempt to verify their ballot, what do you do?
Well, first, I would say that signature verification on its own is relatively pointless. You're right, it would add a lot of work beyond what would even make sense or even be efficient. You would take forever to verify one ballot, and that's not what you want. I'm thinking that encryption has always been an issue since the beginning of time. Even like Roman generals needed to send messages across the battlefield without and assume that the enemy intercepts it. How do you make sure the enemy doesn't figure it out? And there's different ways of encrypting it in a way that the person on the receiving end has the key. So no matter what, if you're intercepted, there's no way it could be read. So I'm thinking something along the lines of that. Could you have something on as the one verifying the voter, the votes and the ballots? Is there something you could have that matches it up with the ballot? Like that if it's a legitimate ballot, it's hard to think of it. It's just how do you have a key on one end and the slot on the other end?
Well, maybe it could be incumbent upon the voter to submit a password to the voter registration board or whatever it's called. They have your password. So then when you go to vote, you have to give them that password. I still don't like mail-in ballots because it doesn't require someone to show up physically. I think you should have to show up physically at a polling station, except for military overseas or something like that. You should have to show up at a polling station, which expresses your interest in voting, and then give them your password, and then they know it's you.
Yeah, that would make more sense. You're right. I mean, it is strange to me that there's no way to verify. Like, I got a mail-in ballot. I sent it in, and it's like there wasn't really anything I even needed to submit to assure them it was me, and that I was the one who filled it out. And I didn't deliver the ballot either, and you had to sign your name on it. But it made me wonder, like, okay, I signed my name on the ballot, but doesn't even mean that I filled in the ballot. So it was odd to me. Like, it wasn't verifying anything. It wasn't. You couldn't use it to verify anything. It's strange to me.
Maybe a password isn't the best thing because some nefarious person can steal the passwords, but maybe you need like 2 or 3 different forms of identification. You need your driver's license or an ID card, and then your password. And then maybe, I don't know, just you showing up and matching a physical description. Maybe they have your physical description, and that's enough. They can verify you.
Sometimes I wonder, though, whether voting is too easy. Like, there's not much verification, or not even much of verification as a citizen to say that you're a competent voter or something like that. I wonder sometimes whether merely the right to vote is just having it by virtue of being a certain age. It doesn't seem good for Republican forms of government. It seems like you want somebody who can assure that they're an engaged citizen in such a way that they are reasoning through their decisions. And I think there would even be less concern over fraud, or even less concern about different ways to verify votes, if we can assure that being registered to vote implies a greater standard than merely being a citizen or merely living in the United States.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm all for raising the age to vote, raising requirements to vote.
This reminds me of how I believe that Electoral College originates in ancient Rome. And like, where just different tiers of people do the voting. And you never have direct voting, probably because to get over this concern of engaged citizens and people who care. But I also think it makes fraud less likely when you have something like an electoral college. It's like you have checks and balances in between. Like you can limit any fraud to one area, or you could limit any outside forces on politics besides a politician himself. You could like almost quarantine where different effects are, and that can prevent fraud.
So I think one of the justifications for having the people vote for at least president and like senators and representatives is that you don't want the political leaders to be beholden to like some other political body.
Perhaps.
You want them to be beholden to the people in general. So the founders came up with this system to try to mitigate corruption and the political leaders giving favors to whoever voted them into office. So I don't have a problem with the people in general voting for president or senator or representatives in the House. My real problem is the mail-in ballots, because I think that system itself is getting us away from a more solid and concrete way of voting and being able to verify the vote. You know, here we're having a huge problem trying to verify the mail-in ballots. Well, we need to cut that off. We need to figure out what's the best system so that we can verify the vote.
Yeah, I think that's the right question. It would be a good idea to change the voting system. I think that'd be the primary thing to do here. I mean, you're right about all these issues. And I think it calls to attention an even greater issue of just needing voting reform, a different way of going about voting. I'm okay kind of with the Electoral College, but I think just even the procedures need to be different. That just like an overhaul throughout the country is what I think is necessary.
Well, I think that's a pretty good start there for thinking about voter fraud. I thank you very much for the conversation, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yep. Thanks. Bye, everyone.